So, back in January 2024, Ethiopia and Somaliland signed a Memorandum of Understanding that, let's be honest, really shook things up in the Horn of Africa. But here's the thing, this agreement might just be one of the most misunderstood documents in modern diplomacy. What the whole controversy really showed us says a lot less about the deal itself and way more about the future of sovereignty in Africa.
So, was it really the most misunderstood deal we've seen lately? I think you could make a pretty strong case for it. So let's cut through all the noise. What this agreement did was expose some fundamental truths. Truths about international law, about the real power dynamics in the region, and most importantly, about a critical opportunity that's now come into sharp focus. For any policymaker with an eye on the Horn of Africa, the real story here isn't what was signed, it's what was revealed.
Okay, let's really dive into this thing. To get to the heart of the controversy, we first have to understand what this document actually is. Because frankly, the global reaction was based on a complete misreading of what was on the paper. At its core, an MOU is a pretty standard diplomatic tool. You can think of it like a handshake on paper. It's basically a statement saying, hey, we intend to talk more about this later. It is not a legally binding treaty. It doesn't trigger immediate changes. It's the starting gun for negotiations, not the finish line. And this is absolutely the crucial point. All the MOU did was put on paper discussions that had been happening for years, exploring cooperation, maybe even swapping recognition for some sea access. But the international outcry? You would have thought they were redrawing the map overnight, like it was some sudden, massive threat to regional stability. All right, let's pivot to the global response, because this is where things get really illuminating. The reaction, and maybe even more importantly, the lack of reaction, tells us pretty much everything we need to know. Okay, get this. Out of nearly 200 nations in the world, how many do you think explicitly condemned this agreement? Just 4. That's it. A remarkably tiny number that totally flies in the face of the whole narrative of universal opposition. And when you look at who these 4 were, their motives become crystal clear. This wasn't about principle, it was all about self-interest. You have Turkey with its own regional ambitions. China, of course, is worried about any precedent for Taiwan. Djibouti's concerned about economic competition. And for Egypt, well, it was a pretty calculated move to try and get some leverage over Ethiopia in the whole Dam negotiation. But you know what? The real story here was the silence, the quiet from major players like the UK and the UAE. It was deafening. And even more telling, the Biden administration tried to rally international opposition against it and just completely failed. This wasn't a unified front at all. It was a huge sign that the old consensus against recognizing Somaliland is seriously cracking. Okay, now we have to tackle the biggest, most misused argument that was thrown against this deal. This idea of territorial integrity. The common line was that recognizing Somaliland would somehow violate Somalia's territorial integrity. But this is a really fundamental misreading of international law. That principle is designed to protect a country from being invaded, from the threat or use of force. It's not there to stop other sovereign states from making their own diplomatic choices. I mean, the UN Charter is super clear on this. Territorial integrity is about stopping external aggression. Ethiopia recognizing Somaliland involves 0 troops, 0 force, 0 invasion. It's just Ethiopia exercising its own sovereign right to decide who it has diplomatic relations with. The whole point is that it doesn't freeze political maps in time forever. And this is so crucial. The principle of territorial integrity protects a state's effective control over its territory, not just some historical claim. The reality is, Somalia has had 0 control over Somaliland for more than 30 years. Somaliland, on the other hand, has been self-governing, stable, and even democratic. Applying that principle here is like defending a map from 1990 instead of looking at the reality on the ground today. Okay, so we've deconstructed the flawed criticism of the MOU, but now let's pivot to a really valid critique of Ethiopia's own approach to this whole thing. The deal's biggest weakness, by far, was how transactional it was. It was basically framed as, we'll give you recognition if you give us sea access. That kind of short-term realpolitik thinking really misunderstands the massive strategic value of a genuine partnership with Somaliland. Just think about it for a second. What if Ethiopia had simply recognized Somaliland on principle? It would have gained so much more than a port. It would have secured a lasting partnership with a democratic, loyal ally in one of the most critical regions in the world. The first country to offer that recognition gains a kind of influence that a simple transaction can never, ever buy.
And this brings us right to the key takeaway for policymakers. The whole controversy has, maybe by accident, revealed a very narrow but very clear window of strategic opportunity for Ethiopia. And that window seems to be centered right on the year 2025.
So why 2025? Well, there are 5 major shifts that make it the perfect moment. First, Somalia just doesn't have the capacity to retaliate in any meaningful way. Second, the African Union has pretty limited leverage to stop Ethiopia. Third, with the Gerd Dam now a reality, Egypt's ability to pressure Ethiopia is way down. Fourth, the old guard in U.S. foreign policy who always resisted this idea, they're gone. And fifth, there's a very real risk that if Ethiopia waits, another country might act first and steal that strategic advantage. I mean, just look at the parallel with the Gerd, Ethiopia's huge dam project. Ethiopia didn't wait around for permission from the international community, did it? No, it acted on its own sovereign interests. The exact same logic applies here to recognizing Somaliland. And that's really the ultimate lesson for any leader or policymaker listening. In geopolitics, decisive, lawful action that's based on your national interest, that's what creates results. Waiting for some perfect consensus that's probably never going to come, that just leads to strategic drift and lost opportunities. So, we're left with this question. The whole blow-up over a simple MOU has pulled back the curtain. It's revealed that the old roadblocks to recognition are way weaker than we thought, and a clear strategic window has opened. The question now is pretty simple. Will Ethiopia act decisively and seize this historic moment, or is it going to let hesitation close the window of opportunity for good?